Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology, a special episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening in wherever you're listening, podcast or YouTube. Appreciate you and your support of the show. We're going to get right into it because we have a lot to talk about today. With New Year's hitting just recently, Happy New Year's, by the way, I thought it would be a great idea to review the last decade of the NBA. You know, we have a lot of narratives out there that are pretty negative about the current NBA season that's been going on for a while. I'm sure if you're like me, you have a little bit of fatigue about that narrative, and we've touched on that on our show. I wanted to look back and talk about everything that has led up to this season that we're in right now. So this is a historical episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology, and I hope you enjoy it. I was excited doing the research for this, and we're going to be looking at the last decade of the NBA, as I said. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, because we have a lot of basketball to cover and a lot of timelines. I'm going to be giving information on some of the award winners, information on champs, and some narratives that were going on, some notable retirements, and things that happened from season to season that I found to be of note. We'll get into, maybe, if you guys like this, some more in-depth reviews of specific seasons in future episodes of the show. So sit back, and since there's a little bit of overlap every single season, we are going to start with the 2013-2014 NBA season. And this season, as you recall, the Heat have just won 2 NBA championships. They beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then more recently, they beat the San Antonio Spurs in dramatic fashion. Ray Allen hitting that shot in Game 6 to save the title for the Heat and send it to Game 7, where LeBron and company took care of business to close out that series. It's the 68th season of the NBA. We have the top draft pick is Anthony Bennett from the Cleveland Cavaliers, UNLV alum Anthony Bennett. He's picked in somewhat shocking fashion. I remember Bill Simmons' reaction to this draft. In the conclusion of this regular season, we have the top seed, San Antonio Spurs, best team in the league. We have Kevin Durant ends up winning the regular season MVP trophy. This is the famous speech where he spoke about his mother and he said, "You the real MVP." Kevin Durant also is our top scorer for this season. He wins the scoring title. When we look into the playoffs, our matchups in the Eastern Conference Finals are the Heat versus the Pacers. This is kind of the tail end of Roy Hibbert's tenure with that team and that setup. The Miami Heat, of course, are victorious and advance to the finals. And the Western Conference Finals are the San Antonio Spurs versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the Thunder, still a fairly young team. They were in the finals just 2 years prior to this, and even though they no longer have James Harden, they're still factors, very much so, and we'll see that play out. The Spurs are victorious. This sets up the rematch, San Antonio versus Miami. Kawhi Leonard, San Diego State University alumni. I remember being amazed that there were so many Mountain West Conference players with high impact around this time frame. Kawhi Leonard wins the finals MVP. The Spurs, of course, get the sweet revenge against the Heat, at least for them. And they do this in what I called video game fashion. I mean, the ball movement, the chemistry, Boris Diaw, Tony Parker. It was something like we had seen very rarely in the NBA and in the recent years anyway. The ball just moved a lot faster than it had for the Heat in those previous 2 championships, a lot less ISO ball, and they really took care of business. They actually beat the Heat in 5 games, so it was pretty astounding fashion. And it ends up, my title for this year and my overarching narrative is that the Spurs liquidate the Heat and get their revenge, and that's exactly what happens. The Heat break up after this happens. A couple other notes on this season. This is the first playoffs in NBA history that all of the Knicks, Lakers, and Celtics franchises miss the playoffs. So these major market teams miss the playoffs. There's still a great amount of interest in the playoffs, however, because of the narratives and this revenge match that's building up on both sides of the brackets. The highest scoring team is the Los Angeles Clippers. They average 107.9 points per game. And you know, if you've been listening to our show on a regular basis, the league average right now is 113 points per game, a little bit above 113 points per game. So you can see that this is the highest scoring team. So it's a slower paced game still at this point, in spite of what the Spurs were able to accomplish. This is the debut of Coach Budenholzer in Atlanta, coming from the Coach Popovich tree of coaches. This is Brad Stevens' debut in Boston, who now you know is in their front office. Jason Kidd, this is his coaching debut for the Brooklyn Nets. And this is Doc Rivers' debut year with the Los Angeles Clippers. Just to kind of give you a little bit more markers here so you know where we are in our timeline of basketball. This is the debut of the New Orleans Pelicans' new name, so changing that name from the Hornets to the Pelicans. This is the first year since 1985 that the finals format returns to 1-1 format from 2-3-2. So it was 2 home, 2 away team, 1-1-1. So the home advantage gets those first 2 home games, then the second winningest team gets the next 2, and so on and so forth. So this is the first time that returns since 1985. The NBA sets a record at this time in its own history for number of international players on opening day. There are a record 92 international players, and there are 10 of these players alone on the San Antonio Spurs roster, which is also an NBA record. At the conclusion, or towards the conclusion, I should say, of this NBA season, right around the All-Star break, David Stern retires as NBA commissioner on the 1st of February, and he's replaced by Adam Silver, who had long been waiting in the wings and I believe associate commissioner. And Adam Silver doesn't waste a whole lot of time because, as you likely remember, just under 3 months after Adam Silver takes the reins as commissioner, Donald Sterling's scandal happens, and on the 29th of April, Adam Silver bans Donald Sterling from the league. And we had, over this past summer, clips came out that you might have seen on FX. We had the great privilege of interviewing one of the actors from the show, so you can go check that out in our library if you haven't seen it. So a lot happens in this 2013-2014 season, and I know we just did a quick run through of that, but I want to get through 10 seasons of basketball, so we're going to move forward. 2014, 2015. The title I have for this season is LeBron's Homecoming. You, I'm sure, knew that was happening with what I mentioned about the Heat being liquidated. LeBron looks around. I think PR-wise, he decides, based on looking at the roster, he decides, I want to go back to Cleveland. Andrew Wiggins is the first pick of the NBA draft. He doesn't stay long in Cleveland because once LeBron James makes his decision, he is a trade asset and he's moved pretty quickly to the Timberwolves, as you'll remember, so Kevin Love can join LeBron in Cleveland. Overview of this season. The top seed, we have the emergence of the Golden State Warriors. So the Warriors had been, there had been this build-up for a few years under Mark Jackson. They were showing a lot of potential. Curry was getting out of his injury bug and had a great season the year before. He full on wins the season MVP. This is his first MVP. The top scorer, and gosh, I had forgotten that Russell Westbrook had led the league in scoring and snatched up a scoring title. But he does just that in OKC. And part of that is he's got to navigate Kevin Durant being injured for some of this season. But he wins a scoring title. Looking at the playoffs, Eastern Conference Finals are the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Atlanta Hawks, Coach Bud's Atlanta Hawks. They were that offensive juggernaut. They were gunning three-pointers. They had Kyle Korver. It was a very feel-good team, but they could not get it done against the Cleveland Cavaliers with LeBron James. LeBron continues his streak, making it to the NBA Finals yet again in the 2010s. The Western Conference goes down as such. The Golden State Warriors take on the Houston Rockets. The Golden State Warriors face the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this is the start of a rivalry between these two teams that we will continue to touch on. The Golden State Warriors are victorious. They beat Cleveland in 6 games. This is very controversial. Not that they beat the Cavaliers, but that Andre Iguodala wins the Finals MVP. I think a lot of people just accept this on face value. I really still to this day strongly feel like LeBron James, and I have my criticisms of LeBron James and his legacy, but I do believe that he was cheated out of this Finals MVP. When you look at, he was playing with Timofey Mozgov and Matthew Dellavedova. Kevin Love was sidelined. Kyrie Irving was sidelined. And, you know, the narrative that LeBron didn't have enough help gets overused over the course of his career. But this really was a series where I felt like LeBron, with the work he put in, he was a little bit cheated out of that Finals MVP. He was the greatest individual performer and certainly the most valuable to his team in that series. All right, we'll let it go. Some notable retirements from this season. Derek Fisher, who had been a long-time Laker, along with some other teams, finished out his career with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He retires. He goes on to coach the New York Knicks for a stint. Chauncey Billups retires. He's coaching the Trailblazers right now. Shane Battier retires following, before going into this 2014-2015 season. Rip Hamilton, so those two Detroit Pistons legends of that 2004 title team, Billups and Rip Hamilton, they both come out together. And Steve Nash also retires after an unfortunate injury-riddled end with Los Angeles. They had that super team they were trying to set up, and it just did not work out. The Bobcats changed their name back to the Hornets this season. First time they had that name since 2002. When the franchise moved. This season also is the coaching debut of both Quinn Snyder for the Utah Jazz, but now he's coaching in Atlanta. And this is the coaching debut for Steve Kerr, who wins the NBA championship in his first year. The highest scoring team in the league is the Golden State Warriors at 110 points per game, and they accumulated 67 wins as the top seed. Oklahoma City, there's a little bit of other controversy in this 2014-2015 season in that Oklahoma City misses the playoffs in spite of a 45-win season. Cleveland swept the 60-win Hawks in the Eastern Conference Finals, so that's kind of a big deal with how good of a season the Atlanta Hawks had. With Cleveland winning the number 1 seed for 2 years in a row, there's a lot of questions about that, and I remember it being a big deal that they won that pick 2 years in a row. Becky Hammon was also hired as an assistant coach, and she becomes kind of a trailblazer. She's the first full-time female assistant coach in any of the 4 major sports leagues. And last note on this season is that the NBA signs a 9-year, $24 billion deal with ESPN and TNT. All right. Moving right ahead into the 2015-2016 season. And I titled this one, Cleveland's Comeback and a Farewell to 3 Legends. This season is the 70th season in NBA history. The number 1 pick is Karl Anthony Towns. He's picked by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Your top seed is the Golden State Warriors, and it's in record fashion. They get that 73-9 season, the best record. They eclipse the Bulls' 72-10 season. And when you factor it in with overall wins, playoffs, plus season, they get the same win total as the Bulls, and we'll talk about why that is. You probably already know. So there's a record tied there with the Bulls. The season MVP is Steph Curry. He wins his second MVP in a row, and it's the first time ever that someone wins a unanimous MVP. He's also the leading scorer. He gets the scoring title of this season. The Eastern champions are the Cleveland Cavaliers. They knock off the Toronto Raptors. It's one of those that starts this narrative, or continues the narrative rather, of the Cavaliers and LeBron humiliating the Toronto Raptors. The Western Conference, we get Golden State versus the OKC Thunder. Kevin Durant is playing. OKC's back in the playoffs, and this becomes very, very consequential because the Golden State Warriors win in 7 and advance to the finals. As you likely know, or could have guessed by my tone, the Cleveland Cavaliers get their revenge in very dramatic fashion. You have LeBlanc from LeBron James, that arguably the greatest highlight of his career. You have this coming in Game 7. You have Kyrie Irving knocking down that clutch shot to seal the deal for the Cavaliers. LeBron James wins the finals MVP, and so much more happens this season. Let me give you a few notes. This is the last season for Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and Tim Duncan. So those are the 3 legends we're saying goodbye to. Kobe finishes his last game with a 60-point thriller and gets the win against the Utah Jazz in this game. This is Mike Malone's first season as head coach with Denver. This is Coach Tyrone Lue's first season with Cleveland after David Blatt is let go following the NBA Finals. And so he repeats the feat that Steve Kerr just accomplished the year before. He wins a title in his debut head coaching year. The Spurs, so we mentioned the Warriors set a record 73 wins. The Spurs finished second with 67 wins. So it's an incredible, one of the top seasons ever for those second place San Antonio Spurs. The point per game leader is the Golden State Warriors, 14.9 points per game as a team. So you see this number is coming up. It was 110 points per game last season for the same team. We have a rule change that is, I think, fairly significant in terms of building narratives, and we'll talk about this more, but you know what's happened and what's going on currently with the play-in tournament, etc. We have a rule change that from now on, the best 8 teams enter the playoffs regardless of who wins their respective divisions, and this has to do with OKC missing the playoffs last season. This has to do with a matchup you can look up between the Mavericks and the Spurs and how seeding plays out for them in a previous playoffs. During this season, in November 1st, the Spurs trio of Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker achieved their 501st regular season win, surpassing the trio of Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. And coincidentally, this also happens against the Celtics. The next day, in a back-to-back, Tim Duncan becomes the player with the most wins with a single team. He gets his 954th win with the San Antonio Spurs. Eventually, his final season, he does eclipse 1,000 wins with the Spurs. Kobe becomes the 3rd player in NBA history to score 33,000 career points. And this is also the second season of the process. This is the second season in a row that the 76ers begin 0-17, which was a rough time to be a 76ers fan. In some ways, you could argue it still is a rough time to be a 76ers fan, but we'll see what they do. Curry also sets a record with 400 three-point field goals in a season. So we're seeing the Warriors flourish, but in spite of their success and the wins, they cannot top the Cleveland Cavaliers. This leads us into the 2016-2017 NBA season. I title this KD's Decision and the Year of the Triple-Double. So Kevin Durant in the offseason makes a decision in spite of taking the Warriors to 7 games with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's had enough in Oklahoma City. He leaves Russell Westbrook and that franchise and joins the Golden State Warriors. It's very, very controversial still to this day. It is considered by many to be a mark on a great basketball career. So we're in the 2016-2017 season. The top draft pick is Ben Simmons by the Philadelphia 76ers. The top seed, once again, is the Golden State Warriors. They get 67 wins this season to be that top seed. The season MVP is Russell Westbrook. You can imagine there was a lot of sympathy coming his way for Kevin Durant having left the franchise. The Oklahoma City Thunder, I believe, were the 6th seed in the playoffs, and he still pulls off the feat of winning the season MVP. He's Mr. Triple-Double, and he is also the top scorer in the league this season. The playoffs play out as such. The Eastern Conference Finals, the Cleveland Cavaliers beat a young Boston Celtics team. The Golden State Warriors beat the San Antonio Spurs. That rivalry continues there, and then we get the rivalry continuing in the NBA Finals. The Golden State Warriors, this time with Kevin Durant on their side, they run over the Cleveland Cavaliers. They beat them in 5 games. So what was kind of an intense rivalry, even when LeBron was short-staffed 2 years before on the Cleveland Cavaliers, that goes to 6 games. This one, there's just too much, and Golden State beats Cleveland once again in 5 games. A couple other notes that happened during this season. Dwayne Wade decides to join the Chicago Bulls as Miami didn't want to pay him what he was looking for. This is the final Paul Pierce season. This is the coaching debut for Kenny Atkinson, who is now coaching the Cleveland Cavaliers very successfully this season. This is a sort of a ceasefire, a time of peace for NBA coaches. This season is the first time since the 1963-64 season that no coaching changes were made during the season. Another thing of note, Devin Booker has a 70-point game. It's quite a few years before his NBA Finals debut. We had 8 players score 50-plus point games, which ties the record that was set back in 1990. The highest scoring team once again is the Golden State Warriors. Now they are all the way up to 116 points per game. Curry sets a record of 13 threes in a game. And this season altogether contains the most triple-doubles in a season since the 1988-89 season. And there were 78 triple-doubles this season. All right, so we move forward, moving right along here. The 2017-2018 NBA season. And this quite simply is a Warriors repeat. Kevin Durant is still on the roster, and the Warriors are still looking very strong. It's really Cavs versus Warriors continues to be built up, talked about. You know, they lost this year. What's Cleveland going to do to build up and get back into this, etc. Coming into this season, the top draft pick is Markelle Fultz of the Philadelphia 76ers. So they get another first pick. The top seed for this season, interestingly enough, is the Houston Rockets. Harden, as we'll see here, he is firing on all cylinders, kind of an offensive juggernaut. The Rockets get 65 wins this season to accomplish that. James Harden wins the season MVP and is also the scoring title winner, leads the league in scoring. For the playoffs, the Cavaliers beat the Boston Celtics. Yes, repeating that. The Golden State Warriors beat the Houston Rockets. And we have what is a big what-if moment for the Houston Rockets, where Harden and Chris Paul are teamed up and they almost get it done versus the Golden State Warriors, in spite of the Warriors having Kevin Durant. There's a hamstring injury that sidelines Chris Paul. And like I said, it's a big what-if moment for these Houston Rockets. So this happens. Golden State gets by them. We get the rematch, and we see, can Cleveland do this? This year, unfortunately for the Cavaliers, they are swept by the Golden State Warriors. Kevin Durant wins Finals MVP yet again. A couple other notes on this season. The Lob City era is over in LA. The Clippers trade Blake Griffin to Detroit, and it's really the start of the end of Blake Griffin's career, his very exciting, entertaining career for the most part. The Warriors once again lead the league in points per game, but it comes back down a little bit to 113.5 points per game. This is the final season for Dwayne Wade, Manu Ginobili, those two legends. One thing of note that I found here is it's the start of two-way contracts. It's also a time where an earlier season start is implemented to reduce back-to-backs, so to try and help players recover a little bit more, try to space games out a little bit more. The season actually starts in the middle of October as opposed to late October. There's a rule change where closeout fouls are elevated to flagrant status. This is known as the Zaza Pachulia rule because of him closing out on Kawhi Leonard and injuring him. And there's another rule called the James Harden rule where it's an offensive foul if a player lunges at a defender or hooks their arms. So you can do stuff to draw fouls, but you can't do those things to draw fouls. We have, unfortunately, this season, 2 devastating injuries that take place to Gordon Hayward in his debut with the Boston Celtics. I'll never forget watching that in live time as it happened. It was pretty horrific. Jeremy Lin also has a really bad knee injury in Brooklyn. Russell Westbrook becomes the first player to average triple doubles in consecutive and multiple seasons. So he accomplishes that feat this season. And small note here, kind of a timeline of the advancement of sports science. Vince Carter and Manu Ginobili face off during the season, and each of them score 15 points or more as 40-year-old players. It's kind of impressive. And I believe that Vince Carter actually had 21 points in that matchup. So Cleveland is now beaten down twice in a row by the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors seem invincible on cloud 9, but will that continue? We go into and the title for this season it's the end of the KD Golden State era. So in spite of them looking invincible, it's about to come to a close. This is also the start of LeBron's LA tenure. So it brings into question the sentimentality of the I'm coming home narrative that he then, a few seasons after, goes ahead and moves to LA and starts that leg of his career. 2018-2019, let's look at some of the info here. DeAndre Ayton is the top draft pick by the Phoenix Suns. Notable draft pick in that draft is also Luka Doncic. The top seed for the league is the Milwaukee Bucks. What? We're talking about the Bucks? Yes, Giannis is starting to ascend. They also are the top scoring team this season, 118.1, so league scoring average still coming up. Overall, the Milwaukee Bucks managed this top seed with only 60 wins, so a great season, but a little bit lower of a win total than previous top seeds since we started our decade in review here. And the season MVP is Giannis Antetokounmpo. He wins his first MVP. Scoring title goes to James Harden. The Eastern champs are the Toronto Raptors. They have a huge run with kind of viewed as a mercenary season for Kawhi Leonard after all the controversy in his exit from San Antonio. He joins up with the Raptors and they go through this incredible run. He has this incredible performance that has earned him many contracts since, and they defeat the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals to ascend to the NBA Finals to face the Golden State Warriors, who limped through these playoffs, and there were a lot of questions if they could complete the three-peat. We just had a few years earlier, the Heat tried to complete the three-peat and they were unsuccessful. Can the Warriors do the same thing? They go through the Portland Trailblazers to get to the NBA Finals. Ultimately, the wheels fall off for the Warriors, as you probably remember, and Toronto defeats the Golden State Warriors in 6 games. It is pretty significant in terms of the fallout that happens after that. Kevin Durant tears his Achilles during those NBA Finals and misses a whole year of basketball following this event. The Finals MVP is Kawhi Leonard, capping off that incredible playoff run. I thought it was interesting, just some notes of the season. James Harden leads all scorers with 36.1 points per game this season, up from 30.4 game the previous season. So he's just going insane this season. This is the debut coaching season for Nick Nurse, and Coach Bud moves to Milwaukee from Atlanta. So he makes it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals in his first season there. There's a fairly significant, I think, when we talk about pace and scoring and why scores are up, I think this is helpful to look at. There's a rule change that's implemented where the shot clock is reduced to 14 seconds off of an offensive rebound. So if you're on offense and you grab the rebound, you only have 14 seconds to get another shot attempt up, and that makes these possessions up to 10 seconds faster. It increases that urgency, increases that pace, and increases number of possessions that we see in the game of basketball. Klay Thompson breaks Steph's single-game three-point record. He gets 14 three-point field goals made in a game. Pretty impressive. During this season, you'll notice we haven't really discussed LeBron James this season. This debut season in LA was unfortunate. It was capped off by an injury from LeBron. The Lakers don't make the playoffs, but he does pass Michael Jordan on the all-time scoring list, so he gets that feather in his cap. This is the final Dirk Nowitzki season, and he, interestingly enough, passes Wilt Chamberlain on the all-time scoring list this final season. This is also the final season for Tony Parker. So again, some big names capping out their careers here this year. Next season, the 2019-2020 NBA season. We have another interesting offseason. You know, LeBron is already set up in his LA tenure, and we get an answer to our question on if the Warriors are going to continue a dynasty very quickly, because Kevin Durant is gone following this season. This season is maybe the most infamous season in the history of the NBA, and you probably already know why going into this is the bubble year, 2019 and 2020. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But overall, we get 63 to 67 games per team, and we get some games in the bubble before, so 8 games per team specifically when the season resumes. And coming into this year, your top draft pick is Zion Williamson. He's picked by the New Orleans Pelicans. Your top seed, once again, is the Milwaukee Bucks, and your top scorer, once again, is James Harden. The playoffs, you have the Miami Heat take on the Boston Celtics, and you have LeBron's return into the conference finals in the West now. The Lakers face off against the Denver Nuggets, a young up-and-coming Denver Nuggets team that's about to make a lot of noise, as you well know. So we get into the finals, and the Lakers take out the Miami Heat, who really, in some ways, it was totally unexpected and maybe a little bit of a fluke. It comes off of a Giannis injury a bit, and they also just have this chemistry and this willpower and this coaching that gets them through to the NBA Finals. I'm sure if you're a basketball fan, you've seen the meme of Jimmy Butler just exhausted in this finals, but the Lakers go ahead and beat this team in 6 games. Some interesting notes about this season. We mentioned the postponement due to the pandemic that happened. So the season is postponed on March 11th. It resumes in late July. On August 26th, the season was suspended. This was during the playoffs for 3 days due to player protests. This season, also in the beginning of 2020, in January, before the pandemic news breaks out, January 26th, we have the untimely passing, the death of Kobe Bryant in that helicopter crash. So it's a very, very down year for basketball as a whole, a very down year for sports as a whole because of all the postponements and things like that. The Milwaukee Bucks, mentioned they were the top seed. They have 56 wins, but keep in mind they played only 73 games, so pretty impressive win percentage. They lead the league in scoring once again, 118.7 per game. Brooklyn's super team, the initial building blocks are formed with KD and Kyrie, but remember that KD was out for this stretch of time. We have the passing of former Commissioner David Stern as well, who really built the league through the golden age and beyond. This was Russell Westbrook's Rockets season. LeBron passes Kobe Bryant on the all-time scoring list this year. Vince Carter retires in June of 2020, so before the season resumes, just before the playoffs. And he's the last player from the nice NBA to retire, and he had a 22-year career. So he's credited, oddly enough, for playing in 4 different decades of the league just based on when he entered. So just tail end of the 90s and very, very start of the 2020s. This is also the rise of Jokic, even though he does not win the MVP this season. You remember between the season suspension and returning to the bubble, Jokic comes back a different man. Everyone's talking about skinny Jokic because he's lost all this weight, and the Nuggets are starting to build up their reputation, even though they are eliminated in the Western Conference Finals. It's pretty impressive that they get there. Kind of came out of nowhere, expecting maybe the Clippers to step up and make it in there, but that didn't happen. Moving forward, the 2020-2021 NBA season. We're getting close to modern times. This season, I titled this International Players Dominate, and the league navigates delays and postponements. Because even though we are back to a planned season of basketball, it's not exactly the same. We start this season just 3 months after the last one ended. And so the number of games is reduced to 72 games. There are many games that are delayed, postponed. It's kind of frustrating if you're trying to attend one of these games or making the time to watch one of these games, but the wheels are turning. We're getting back into it. And so looking overall here, the top draft pick was Anthony Edwards. Once again, the Minnesota Timberwolves get a number 1 pick over the course of this decade. The top seed is the Utah Jazz, headed by this dominating defense, still under coach Quinn Snyder. Jokic grabs his first regular season MVP this season. He's really starting to break out. You can't really deny him based on the analytics and the numbers that he's putting up. Steph Curry is your scoring title winner this season. As far as the playoffs go, the Bucks take down the Atlanta Hawks. For the Hawks, this is sort of their improbable, unexpected run where they took out the 76ers. They take out the Knicks. There's this great rivalry for a brief moment between Trae Young and the Knicks, but they're bested by the Bucks, and the Bucks end up meeting the Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference, or in the NBA Finals. The Suns take out the Los Angeles Clippers in the Western Conference Finals. The Bucks go ahead and win their first NBA title since 1971 when Kareem and Oscar Robertson were on the team. So it's a great moment for the city of Milwaukee, and Giannis picks up the finals MVP. He comes back from dislocating his knee, comes back very quickly from that, and just dominates in that NBA Finals and in that playoff run overall, really. Some other notes on this season. We mentioned a little ways back that Jeremy Lin had a catastrophic injury. He retires this season. Some other names you probably recognize. Joakim Noah retires this season, along with LaMarcus Aldridge. With the many delays in games and postponements, there's questions going around throughout the season if we'll ever get back to normalcy with this. There's protesting that continues. There's a lot of activism continuing on this year in the NBA. This is also the year of the first postseason play-in tournament. Mentioned that Milwaukee was the top seed in the league. They also were the top scorers once again, 120.1 points per game. So you can see that's the highest number we've had to date of our list of best offenses throughout this decade. And during this period of time, James Harden joins the Nets to form arguably the most disappointing super team in league history. There are moments where they just look completely unstoppable on offense, but it just never pans out for them. This is the season with KD's foot on the line, being counted as a 2-pointer instead of a 3-pointer. Brooklyn gets close, but fails to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. Another note about this season and kind of the hangover from the previous season, Toronto ends up playing their full season in Florida just because of restrictions in Canada and international travel. This is Russell Westbrook's Wizards stint. And so again, a big moment is that a multiple-time MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo gets his first NBA title. Moving right along to the 2021-2022 2022 NBA season. I labeled this the NBA 75. It's the 75th season in the NBA, and this is also Warriors' last dance. If you consider that team a dynasty, this is arguably the final high point for that team, although, of course, Draymond and Steph are still on that team at the moment. Let's take a look. We have a normal number of games this season. We have a normal start time for this season, so we're starting to get a little bit more normalcy. There's still postponements going on through late December of 2021. Then we get back into sort of a more normal rhythm as we head into 2022. The top seed this year ends up being the Phoenix Suns, who get 64 wins over the course of the season. Jokic wins MVP once again, and Joel Embiid is your top scorer, getting his first scoring title ever, and so hence the international dominance. There's big international names on just about all these top teams, and in some cases they are the face of that team, the number one option for that team. The playoffs this year breaks down with the Boston Celtics defeating the Miami Heat. Once again, the Heat are making playoff noise, overachieving from where they start in the postseason. The Western Conference ends up being the Golden State Warriors versus the Dallas Mavericks, and the Mavericks run through that top seed Phoenix Suns team to get here. It's a huge disappointment for those Phoenix Suns, and so you end up with Golden State in, I would say, surprising fashion. I wasn't too surprised that they topped the Celtics, but I was surprised that they were able to run through the playoff gauntlet in this kind of now aged, relatively speaking, state of that core group. They get it done, and Steph has an incredible run, especially. They defeat the Celtics in 6 games. Steph Curry wins the Finals MVP this time around. It's his first Finals MVP, because you'll remember Kevin Durant was awarded Finals MVPs and Andre Iguodala was awarded a Finals MVP. Now Steph Curry claims his own Finals MVP. This is a season where you had a special NBA 75 kind of event to honor the 75 greatest players in NBA history. So a big list is created. We talked about this a lot on our show at the time and had some great guests come in and give their analysis on this. You have retirements this season for Pau Gasol, J.R. Smith, J.J. Redick, who's now Lakers coach, Tyson Chandler, Kyle Korver, and Jamal Crawford, arguably the greatest sixth man of all time. For points per game, the Minnesota Timberwolves actually lead the league in this category, 115.9 points per game. We're still seeing very potent offenses all around the league, and that is not going to stop moving forward. Steph Curry this season becomes the all-time leader in three-point field goals, passing Ray Allen. Greg Popovich becomes the winningest coach in NBA history this season, and over the course of the season, Giannis, Jokic, Luka Doncic, and Joel Embiid dominate and kind of headline the talent around the league. So even though the narrative had been going for some time, it's just even more prevalent, and there's more and more justification for this narrative being at the forefront, that the international talent is becoming greater than the American talent. Maybe not overall, but at the top end, it certainly seems to bear out now. Moving right along, coming to the end of our timeline and the end of our decade in review, the 2022-2023 NBA season. I have 2 notes here that are main things. You can see that, the NBA 75 is a special thing for 75 years of the NBA. The Warriors' last dance connects to the past, although they don't really go through any of those past rivals to get there. Now we're having a season that's kind of detached from these past narratives and these rivalries that we had. You can argue whether or not the rivalries were great, but there was a lot of attention around Heat versus Spurs. There was a lot of attention around LeBron versus KD, Warriors versus the Cavaliers, etc. Now my headline for this year is that Jokic becomes a champion, so an NBA great becomes a champion, and LeBron passes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Those are the 2 really big things of note. There other things of note that we'll go over, of course. But looking at the breakdown of this 2022-23 NBA season, Paolo Banchero is the top draft pick to the Orlando Magic. The Milwaukee Bucks are the top seed once again with 58 wins. Joel Embiid, in somewhat controversial fashion, wins the regular season MVP. His stats are there for sure. There's a media campaign that you can look into that really pushes Joel Embiid being the MVP and questions if Jokic should be at the top of the ballot, but it's a close 1-2. Joel Embiid ends up being the victor and gets his first MVP. Top scorer is Joel Embiid as well. He wins the scoring title this year. The playoffs break down with the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics facing off in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Miami Heat actually somewhat shocked the world and beat the finals participants, Boston Celtics, of the previous season. So there's a huge moment for the Celtics where, what do? Do we blow it up? That narrative continues of, can Tatum and Brown get the job done and win an NBA Finals? Because they haven't done it yet to this point, in spite of being together for several years and having a lot of playoff success to this point. The Western Conference is the Nuggets versus the Lakers, and the Nuggets eliminate the Lakers fairly easily and advance to the finals, where they take down the Miami Heat also fairly easily. Of note is that the Heat are the 8th seed here, and they make it to the NBA Finals. It was a very impressive run on their part, but just could not best Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. Jokic wins the Finals MVP. Some other notes: Carmelo Anthony retires at the end of this season, one of the greatest scorers in league history, and had the same sort of timeline as LeBron in terms of came into the league around the same time, had previous college title success, and was a big name in the league for many years. Ultimately, never wins an NBA championship. The NBA Global Games return for the first time in nearly 3 years. So the NBA starts touring once again, having exhibitions in other countries. Scoring continues to ascend. Your highest scoring team by points per game are the Sacramento Kings, 120.7 points per game. Damian Lillard and Donovan Mitchell each dropped 71-point games this season. And Bill Russell, NBA legend, civil rights activist as well, and just legendary face around the league, 11-time champion, of course, for that Boston Celtics dynasty. He passes away, and the jersey number 6 is retired across the league. Mentioned it in the title of Thoughts for this season, but on February 7th, 2023, LeBron James also passes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the NBA's all-time leading scorer. And that brings us to our final season, the most recent completed NBA season 2023. Title for this one is Celtics Get Over the Hump, the OKC Thunder Rise Up. And who's next? Because we're all talking about it. We're still talking about it. Who is going to capture the hearts and the attention of America when it comes to basketball? Because it doesn't seem to be Jokic, Giannis, or to a lesser extent Embiid, in spite of their success. So looking at this breakdown of this season, we have the top draft pick is Victor Wembanyama for the San Antonio Spurs. The top seed is the Boston Celtics, and they do this in pretty dominating fashion. 64 wins. They're easily the top seed in the Eastern Conference, but top seed in the NBA at large. Jokic wins his 3rd MVP. The top scorer this season is Luka Doncic. He's rising up, and he will again, as you'll see here when we talk about the Western Conference Finals. It was the Dallas Mavericks versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Timberwolves got through the Denver Nuggets, and then they lose to the Dallas Mavericks. Luka, in spite of being somewhat hobbled by injuries, gets through to the finals, and there he meets that top seed Boston Celtics team who went through the Indiana Pacers. It's, I would say, a lackluster postseason. There's a lot of blowouts. There's a lot of injuries. There's really not very much drama on the Eastern bracket side of things, aside from an entertaining series of the Pacers versus the Knicks. But even that one is marked by some injuries. So the Celtics get through, and when they meet in the finals, they take care of business, and they beat the Mavericks in 5 games. And again, part of that is that Luka's a bit injured, but really the Celtics are just a better, more complete team. Finals MVP goes to Jaylen Brown, and deservedly so if you remember his contributions in that series. A couple other notes, and then we'll wrap up here. The Celtics defeated the Mavericks in 5 games. We mentioned Luka's dominant playoff run. He also had a 73-point game against the Atlanta Hawks in the regular season. The highest scoring offense in the league is the Indiana Pacers with 123.3 points per game. That's the highest number that we've mentioned in our list. The in-season tournament launches this season to, I would say, moderate success. The Lakers, as you remember, were the first champions of that. As far as retirements go, we have Udonis Haslem, longtime Miami Heat player. He retires with the Heat. Rajon Rondo retires. Lou Williams, Andre Iguodala, Blake Griffin, and Marc Gasol all retire. And the surprise team this year was the OKC Thunder. They're the top seed in the West as we speak this current season. And Victor Wembanyama has his rookie year. There's a bit of talk between him and Chet Holmgren, but Wemby ends up winning Rookie of the Year. And there we have it. A decade in review. So we had some highs, some rivalries, some lows. You can see as we move towards the end, there's a little bit less of a thread running through things. A little bit. I think if you're a Celtics fan, you appreciate that the Celtics finally get over the hump. But in terms of like a national narrative, it starts to unravel a little bit more as, KD is going to Brooklyn and then later going to Phoenix in the most recent season. There's less narrative around him. There's less of him facing off versus LeBron. There's also a heavy reliance by the league on still marketing and pushing the Lakers, and more specifically LeBron James, in spite of, really not very much postseason success following their title in 2020. So it's been for almost 5 years removed now since LeBron won that title, and he's still being pushed as the face of the league. So let me know your thoughts and whatever stood out to you the most about this past decade. I think those rivalries are still big for me. They're a little bit more tangible, and I remember them very well, and all the narratives that were built up and sort of the intrigue and interest in what these teams were doing in their arms races. I personally am overall opposed to super teams and the builds like this. I think in some ways that has been what has sped up and accelerated the breaking of these longer tenures and the chance for these narratives to build on these teams. But you certainly may feel differently about it. Let us know your thoughts. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, we are planning to do sometime in the future, if you really like it, we'll do it sooner than later, deep dives of some critical individual seasons of the past. Justin wasn't here for this one, but I'll give him a shout out. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Thanks for tuning in to In the Lab with Hoopsology. Take care. Have a great start of your new year. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.